$60,000 a year. Break it down, and that's $5,000 a month before taxes touch it. Stop and sit with that number for a second. It's more money than the vast majority of human beings who have ever lived on this planet will earn in an entire year. By any historical standard, that's not survival money. That's abundance money. Now picture the reality. Millions of 20-somethings all sitting on that exact income, staring at a banking app 4 days before payday, texting a friend the same message. Can you front me 20 bucks until Friday? Not because they're broke in the traditional sense. They have a job, a paycheck, a number that should mean stability, and yet Friday still feels like a cliff edge every single week. Here's what you'll hear first every time. Avocado toast. Stop buying coffee. That's not an explanation. That's a 70-year-old's talking point recycled into a TikTok comment. It's not a mechanism. It's a moral judgment dressed up as economics, and it survives because it lets everyone stop thinking. We're not doing that here. We're going to actually find the machine. So here's the actual puzzle, and it's a strange one. This is the most educated generation in American history, the most in-debt generation in American history, and on paper, the most financially literate generation in American history, raised on budgeting apps, investing subreddits, and 1,000 hours of personal finance content. So why is the paycheck still gone by Tuesday? Let's get precise, because vague statistics are how people get away with vague explanations. Multiple recent surveys put the paycheck-to-paycheck rate for adults under 35 at close to 60%. Not 40, not 25, 60. That means 6 out of every 10 young people earning a full-time income are functionally one missed check away from collapse. That is not a personal failure rate. That's a systemic one. So you have two options, and only two. Option 1, 60% of an entire generation simultaneously became reckless with money, all on the same timeline, all in the same direction. Option 2, something structural is doing this to them, on purpose or as a side effect, regardless of how carefully any individual person budgets. One of these options requires a mass psychological event. The other just requires math. So let's name the thing, because you can't dismantle what you refuse to name. Call it the treadmill. Every time your income increases, the belt speeds up to match it, automatically, invisibly, without you ever choosing it. It's expensive to be on. It runs whether you're paying attention or not. And once you understand that a machine is doing this, the avocado toast argument stops making any sense. Here's the part that should actually unsettle you. The treadmill isn't broken. It was never broken. It is working exactly as it was designed to work. Faster income produces a faster belt, which produces the exact same distance traveled. Zero. This isn't a glitch in the system. This is the system performing its core function, and you are the one supplying the energy. By the time this video ends, you will not be able to look at your own bank statement the same way again. You'll see the pattern in every purchase you made this month, in every decision you thought was yours alone. That's not a threat. That's a promise. Once you see the treadmill for what it is, you cannot unsee it, and that's exactly where we're headed. So here's the plan. We're going to open the treadmill up and look at exactly what's inside it. 3 layers, hidden in plain sight, each one invisible until you know to look for it. And then there's a 4th layer, the one most people won't say out loud because it means someone somewhere is profiting from the gap between your income and your actual freedom. Now, the standard response to all of this is he overspends. That's the whole story. And sure, technically true. But that's like saying a man drowned because he swallowed water. Correct, and completely useless. It tells you the mechanism of death, not the reason he was in the ocean in the first place, or why the current was pulling him out that far to begin with. Here's the actual question worth asking. Why do people overspend consistently, predictably, even after they've watched every budgeting video on the internet, downloaded the app, made the spreadsheet, and promised themselves this month is different? If willpower and information were the fix, this generation would already be fixed. They have more financial content available to them than any generation in human history, and they're still drowning. Layer 1, the income illusion. $60,000 sounds like a number that means freedom. A real salary, a grown-up number, proof you made it. But that number was never designed to be evaluated on its own. It only means anything relative to what it has to cover, where you live, and when you entered the economy. And on all 3, the ground has shifted underneath it. Go back to the 1970s and 80s. Median rent ran somewhere around 15 to 18% of a single median income, 1 paycheck, not 2. Today, that ratio has roughly doubled in most major metros, often past 30%, sometimes closer to 50. So when someone tells a 24-year-old to just get a decent job like their parents did, they're citing an economy that mathematically no longer exists. The 50-30-20 rule feels like eternal wisdom, but it has a birth date. Elizabeth Warren proposed it in 2005 in a book about family balance sheets, 50% to needs, 30 to wants, 20 to savings. It was built for an economy where a one-bedroom ran maybe $700. Nobody recalibrated the ratio when rent tripled. The formula never changed. The math underneath it did. Run the number the way most people never do. $60,000 a year split by the 50% needs bucket the rule sets. That's $2,500 a month for rent, groceries, transportation, insurance, and utilities before a single want or dollar of savings. On paper, it sounds workable. Compare it to an actual lease, and the number stops sounding like a budget and starts sounding like a joke. $2,500 a month for needs sounds fine until you check actual rents. Chicago, Denver, Austin, Raleigh, the mid-tier cities Gen Z moves to for affordability. Run $1,400 to $2,000 a month for a decent one-bedroom alone. Not luxury, not downtown. That's 56 to 80% of the needs bucket consumed by rent alone in cities picked because they were supposed to be cheap. Sit with that number. Rent alone, just rent, nothing else, already eats 28 to 40% of gross income. Before food, before a car payment, before a phone bill. The 50% needs bucket was supposed to cover all of it. Instead, one line item swallows most of the bucket by itself. Food, transportation, and insurance haven't even entered the equation yet, and the budget is already broken. Now the tax layer starts, and this is where most people's math breaks. Federal tax is bracketed not flat, but almost nobody separates marginal rate from effective rate. Marginal is what you pay on your last dollar earned. Effective is the average across every dollar. Someone in the 22% bracket isn't losing 22% of their income. They're losing far less, but the confusion costs people decisions. State tax adds another variable most budgets ignore. Texas and Florida charge 0% state income tax. California charges up to 9.3% at the top bracket. Same $60,000 salary, same job title, and the paycheck can differ by thousands a year depending on which state line you live on. The treadmill runs at a different speed by zip code, and nobody warns you before you sign the lease. Then there's the tax nobody talks about, because it never touches your account long enough to notice. FICA payroll deductions, Social Security, and Medicare take 7.65% off the top before the paycheck even exists, not after you get paid. Before. It's gone by the time the number hits your account, which is why it never registers as a loss the way rent or a bill does. Add it up. Federal effective rate, state tax, and FICA together land the total burden around 23 to 27% of gross pay for a $60,000 earner, depending on the state. That means take-home lands somewhere between $3,700 and $3,800 a month. Not $60,000 divided by 12. Not $5,000 a month. Spendable income is already down by a quarter before a single bill gets paid. Now run the rent math again against the real number, not the fantasy one. Take home of $3,700 minus a $1,600 apartment, modest for these cities, leaves $2,100. $2,100 a month to cover food, a car, insurance, a phone, healthcare, and anything resembling a life. The 50-30-20 rule assumed this number would still be comfortable. It was never built for this math. Layer in student debt and the picture gets worse. Since the 1980s, College Board data shows tuition has climbed roughly 8 times faster than wages. The average borrower now carries close to $38,000 in student loan debt. That debt didn't come from bad decisions. It came from a generation told college was the only path, priced at rates that outran what the resulting jobs could pay back. Here's the trap inside the trap. Income-based repayment. It caps your monthly payment low enough to feel manageable, but if that payment doesn't cover the interest accruing, the balance grows anyway, negative amortization. You can make every payment on time for years and still owe more than you started with. People call this winning because the bill feels smaller while the total interest paid over 20 years climbs higher. Now the car. A new car payment averages roughly $700 a month. Used, still around $500. Insurance stacks on top and drivers under 30 pay far more, not because they're worse drivers, but because risk pooling prices the whole age bracket by its statistical outliers. You're not being charged for your driving record. You're being charged for a stranger's accident 3 states away 5 years ago. Health insurance, even through an employer, still costs Gen Z workers real money every month. Premiums, deductibles, copays, eating what's left before a single doctor visit happens. Groceries on a realistic meal prep budget rather than a fantasy one. Run $300 to $400 a month for one person eating adequately. None of this is indulgence. It's survival math. Already eating what little the previous layers left standing. Phone plan, internet, streaming you need for basic modern life. Call it another $150 a month. Add it all up, every layer done exactly the way the rule prescribes, and the tally lands at $510 left over. $510 from $60,000 a year after doing literally everything correctly. That's not a budgeting failure. That's the treadmill working exactly as designed. Here's the verdict on layer 1. $510 a month sounds like progress until you run the actual math against risk. A blown transmission averages $2,800. A single ER visit with insurance still averages $1,500 out of pocket. At $510 a month, saved perfectly. With zero leakage, Marcus needs 3 months just to cover one bad week. One emergency erases a quarter's worth of discipline instantly. And that math assumes something generous, a stable baseline. Flat income, flat cost, nothing moving underneath you. But the treadmill's real trick isn't holding the belt at one speed. It's speeding up the belt exactly when you start running faster. Give Marcus a raise and watch what happens to that $510. It doesn't grow, it vanishes. Call this layer 2 structural cost inflation. Unlike layer 1, this one doesn't show up on a pay stub or a rent receipt. It shows up nowhere because it happens inside decisions that each look completely reasonable in isolation. That's what makes it dangerous. It's invisible while it's happening to you and only visible in hindsight once the money's already gone. Run the raise scenario. Marcus goes from $60,000 to $75,000, a 25% jump, the kind of number that feels like an escape hatch. But $15,000 never arrives as $15,000. Taxes take a bracket-shaped bite first. Then a new commute, a nicer apartment closer to the office, insurance premiums that scale with salary. Each one quietly eats a slice before it ever reaches savings. Here's bracket creep in plain terms. The U.S. tax system is progressive. You don't pay one flat rate, you pay increasing rates on each slice of income above a threshold. Cross into a higher bracket and only the income above that line gets taxed more. But payroll withholding, phased out credits, and higher effective state tax combine to shrink the raise on paper into something smaller on the actual deposit. Now the term for what eats the rest, lifestyle inflation. Personal finance writers have used it for decades to describe spending that rises in lockstep with income, purchase by purchase. Each individual choice is rational. Better food, a safer car, an apartment in a better zip code. The failure isn't in any single decision. It's structural, rational choices made independently that are collectively fatal to the goal of saving. Watch the upgrade cascade in real time. A better mattress because sleep affects performance. A newer car because the old one has 140,000 miles and a check engine light. Better clothes because interviews and client meetings demand it. Defend any one of these purchases alone and you'll win the argument every time. Stack all three together and the raise that was supposed to build a cushion has already been spent. This isn't speculation, it's a documented find. In 1971, psychologists Philip Brickman and Donald Campbell coined the term hedonic treadmill after studying lottery winners. Within roughly a year, winners who'd received life-changing sums reported baseline happiness levels statistically indistinguishable from people who'd never won anything. The brain doesn't register a permanent gain. It registers a temporary spike, then resets to where it started. Apply that finding directly to Marcus's raise. A salary bump isn't a lottery jackpot, but the neurology runs on the same circuit. The dopamine response to $75,000 spikes hard in month 1, fades by month 3, and by month 6, $75,000 simply feels like the new normal, no better than $60,000 did a year earlier. The treadmill doesn't reward the raise, it absorbs it. This creates what we can name the perpetual starting point. Ask Marcus when he plans to start seriously saving, and the answer is always the same shape, after the next raise. Not now, later, once there's more room, but the next raise never arrives as room. It arrives already spoken for, absorbed by the same cascade, and the starting point quietly moves forward another year. There's a name for why this keeps winning: hyperbolic discounting. Economists George Ainsley and David Leibson mapped how humans value time. We don't discount the future steadily, we discount it steeply, valuing comfort today far more than an equal reward next year. Offered $500 now or $600 in 12 months. Most people take the $500. Future savings loses to present comfort almost every single time it's actually tested. Quick pause, one thing, not a request. If you've made it this far through tax brackets and hedonic treadmills and Ainsley-Leibson discounting curves, you're not the sandwich video type. You're the kind of person who wants the mechanism, not the vibes. Subscribe if that's you. Not because it helps the channel, because you'll want the next one when it drops. That brings us to layer 3, and it's the one that explains why none of this self-corrects as income rises. Layers 1 and 2 are structural, tax code, cost cascades, things you could theoretically out-earn. Layer 3 lives somewhere the math can't reach, inside the adaptation of the brain itself. This is psychological adaptation, and it's the reason a bigger paycheck never feels like enough. Here's the precise definition. Hedonic adaptation is the brain's tendency to recalibrate what counts as normal faster than any raise can outrun it. Give it a new baseline, a bigger deposit, a nicer apartment, and within weeks, that baseline stops registering as gain. It just becomes the floor. which means the target Marcus is chasing isn't fixed. It moves every time he gets close. In 1954, psychologist Leon Festinger published social comparison theory. People don't judge their status against some fixed standard. They judge it against whoever is physically nearest to them. One neighbor, one coworker, one sibling with a slightly nicer car. That was the original benchmark, a single data point updated slowly, maybe once a week when you actually saw them in person. Now compare that to what runs through your phone before breakfast, an algorithmic feed serving 10,000 curated highlight reels a week, each one filtered, staged, and selected specifically because it performed well on someone else. Festinger's subjects compared themselves to one neighbor's actual life. You compare yourself to 10,000 strangers' best 5 seconds, stitched together into something that looks like a normal day. That feed isn't neutral. Aspirational content, the new apartment, the upgraded car, the vacation, gets more engagement than ordinary footage, so the ranking system amplifies it on purpose. Nobody designed this to make you miserable. It's just optimizing for watch time, and the content that keeps people watching happens to be the content that makes their own life look smaller by comparison. Here's what that does to a baseline in practice. A perfectly fine 2016 Honda, paid off, reliable, zero issues, starts to feel less like transportation and more like a statement about where you failed to arrive. An apartment without in-unit laundry, which used to be completely normal, starts to feel like a downgrade rather than the standard starting point it actually is. To make this concrete, follow one composite case. Call him Marcus, 22 years old, marketing degree, $32,000 in student debt, first job out of college paying $48,000 a year. Nothing dramatic about his numbers. He's not behind by any objective measure. He's exactly average. And average on this treadmill still doesn't add up the way it's supposed to. At 22, Marcus splits rent 3 ways, drives a car he already paid off a decade ago, and manages to save $300 a month. It's thin. It's not exciting, but it's real, measurable progress. The kind of number that left alone and compounding actually turns into something over 40 years. This is the version of Marcus with the most upside he will ever have. At 24, Marcus gets promoted to $62,000 a year, a genuinely good raise. He moves into a nicer apartment. He finances a newer car instead of driving the paid-off one. The raise gets absorbed almost immediately by upgrades that each feel individually justified, and his monthly savings actually drops from $300 down to $220. At 26, Marcus and his partner have a combined household income near $120,000. Bigger apartment, one international trip a year. On paper, by every visible signal, this looks like winning. The promotion worked, the partnership worked, the income doubled since 22. It still isn't working, not underneath, and nothing in the visible signals would tell you that. At 27, the breakup happens. Marcus moves into a one-bedroom he can't really afford solo, priced for 2 incomes and now carried by one. The car, older now, starts needing real repairs, not routine maintenance, actual 4-figure repairs, stacking up back to back. The treadmill that looked winnable at 26 is now openly outrunning him at 27. Here's the number that actually lands the point. Over those 5 years, Marcus earned roughly $280,000 total. His net savings across all of it, $11,000. Not $11,000 a year, $11,000 total after 5 years of raises, a promotion, and a partnership that briefly doubled his household income. Reframe this properly because the obvious read is wrong. This isn't a story about Marcus failing morally, spending recklessly, or lacking discipline. Every single decision he made, the promotion, the apartment upgrade, the trip, the newer car, was individually rational, given the information and incentives in front of him at that moment. The failure isn't his. It's structural, and it was built that way on purpose. So name layer 4. Who actually benefits from that gap between what Marcus earns and what he keeps? Credit card companies collecting interest on the balances that cover the shortfall. Landlords building equity on properties Marcus will never own a share of. Subscription platforms billing him monthly for conveniences he forgot he signed up for. Someone is profiting from exactly the gap he can't close. Give the steel man its due. None of these companies broke a law. There's no boardroom conspiracy. No secret memo targeting Marcus specifically. Credit products, rental markets, and subscription services are simply market rate businesses optimized for retention and repeat revenue, the same way any competitive business optimizes for its own survival. That part of the argument is completely true. But true isn't the same as neutral. Those rules were written by entities whose stated goal was never Marcus's net worth. It was their own revenue optimized line by line, quarter by quarter for decades. That doesn't make them your enemy. It doesn't make them your friend either. It makes them exactly what they are. Systems built for someone else's outcome, running on your input. Every dollar you touch falls into one of 2 categories. Category 1, decisions you actually make, consciously, deliberately, with friction. Category 2, decisions made for you, engineered to require zero effort, zero thought, zero resistance. The treadmill doesn't need you to choose poorly. It only needs you to default. And defaults by design always point one direction, away from you. In 2004, economists Richard Thaler and Shlomo Benartzi proved this with a program called Save More Tomorrow. Workers who had to actively opt into retirement savings mostly didn't. Workers who were automatically enrolled, with contributions rising by default, stayed enrolled at rates near 90%. Same math, same incentive, opposite outcome, because the choice architecture, not the person, decided the result. Look at the actual friction. Opening a brokerage account, 9 form fields, a mailed verification code, a beneficiary designation you have to think about, 20 minutes minimum. Ordering dinner, 1 tap, saved card, 4 seconds, dopamine on delivery. The system didn't accidentally make saving harder than spending. Every screen you touch was a /B tested by someone whose salary depends on friction, pointing exactly this way. Here's the evidence, and it isn't flattering. January, a color-coded budget spreadsheet, 4 tabs, a savings goal circled in green. March, the spreadsheet hasn't been opened in 6 weeks. Meanwhile, the 401k, set up on day 1 of the job, still sits at the exact default contribution, 3% untouched for years, because touching it required a decision and the spreadsheet didn't. Now the number that matters, $500 a month, invested at 8% starting at 22 becomes roughly $2.1 million by retirement. The same $500, same 8%, starting at 28 instead, 6 years later becomes about $1.3 million. Same discipline, same amount, same person. $800,000 gone and nothing was ever spent. Reframe that gap correctly, because 6 years sounds small. It isn't 6 years lost. It's 35 to 50% of your entire lifetime portfolio gone before you turn 29. Compound interest doesn't punish you evenly across a lifetime. It punishes you almost entirely at the start. When the treadmill has convinced you that waiting costs nothing. The treadmill was never rigged against effort. It was rigged against autopilot. The belt only ever matches the speed you choose to reveal, not the speed you're capable of, the speed you actually set on purpose in writing. Most people never touch the dial. You now know where it is.